Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Chapter 2, or Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 40. Alright. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān, bhadraṁ, prajānām, anvicchan. ātiṣṭhat svārtha-kāmyayā. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān, bhadraṁ, prajānām, anvicchan. ātiṣṭhat svārtha-kāmyayā. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān, bhadraṁ, prajānām, anvicchan. ātiṣṭhat svārtha-kāmyayā. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān, bhadraṁ, prajānām, anvicchan. ātiṣṭhat svārtha-kāmyayā. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān. Prajā-patir, dharma-patir. Ekadā, niyamān. Bhadraṁ, prajānām, anvicchan. ātiṣṭhat svārtha-kāmyayā. All right, word for word. Prajā-patir, the forefather of all living entities. Dharma-patir, the father of religious life. Ekadā, once upon a time. Niyamān, rules and regulations. Yamān, principles of control. Bhadram, welfare. Prajānām, of the living beings. Anvicchan, desiring. ātiṣṭhat, situated. Sva-artha, own interest. Kāmyayā, so desiring. Translation: thus, once upon a time, the forefather of living entities and the father of religiousness, Lord Brahmā, situated himself in acts of regulative principles, desiring self-interest for the welfare of all living entities. Repeat after me. Thus, once upon a time, the forefather of living entities and the father of religiousness, Lord Brahmā, situated himself in acts of regulative principles, desiring self-interest for the welfare of all living entities. Purport by His Divine Grace, Abhaya Charnavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. One cannot be situated in an exalted position without having undertaken a regulative life of rules and regulations. An unrestricted life of sense gratification is animal life. And Lord Brahmā, in order to teach all concerned within the jurisdiction of his generations, taught the same principles of self-control for executing higher duties. He desired the welfare of all as servants of God, and anyone desiring the welfare of the members of his family and generations must conduct a moral religious life. The highest life of moral principles is to become a devotee of the Lord, because a pure devotee of the Lord has all the good qualities of the Lord. On the other hand, one who's not a devotee of the Lord, however qualified he may be in the mundane sense of the term, cannot be qualified with any good quality worthy of the name. The pure devotees of the Lord, like Brahmā and persons in the chain of disciplic succession, do not do anything to instruct their subordinates without acting accordingly themselves. Om Agna Timarendasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmalitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So in sentence number 2, first time I read this, I was just a little bit confused about one of the words used here. It goes like this: an unrestricted life of sense gratification is animal life, and Lord Brahmā, in order to teach all concerned within the jurisdiction of his generations. So what that actually means is that he's generating various different living beings and different types of material energy, planets, living beings, the trees, animals, everything like that. That's what he meant. That's what's meant by his generations, generating things. Just in case anybody was wondering, because I was. So I thought I would share that. In the Bhagavad Gita, the same concept is put forward, as Srila Prabhupada points out in the end here, that great souls, great personalities, they act exemplary, and they would only do what they would expect others to do, and they wouldn't do otherwise. So in the Bhagavad Gita, I remembered this one verse, chapter 3, verse 21, Yad acharata shreshtas tad evataro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokas tad anuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standard he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So throughout history, those who we remember with great fondness, of course there's been lots of personalities throughout history. Some are remembered fondly and some are not. Some are noteworthy because of their nefarious activities. And the ones that are most noteworthy and who have achieved the greatest fame, great religious personalities, personalities from the past who have performed amazing feats and activities and great deeds. Those are the ones who are who men look up to, men and women look up to. They're our heroes. They are the people that we would like to try to be like, but of course it's very difficult. And then, of course, on the other side, on the flip side of things, there are those who are extremely noteworthy because of their nefarious and dastardly deeds. And in this day and age, in the Kali Yuga, that seems to be a very popular thing. Kali Yuga started 5,000 years ago. Prior to that time, history is a bit sparse with what information that we have. In Western literature, we go back to the time of the Greeks, and they don't go too much further than that. I think that the time of what was going on in Iran with their ancient civilizations was before that, was before the Greeks, I do believe, or around the same time. And then after that comes the Egyptians, or the Egyptians were before the Greeks, I think. Is that the way it goes? Egyptians before the Greeks in their history? I think so. and then we go into the Romans, and then things just kind of seem to go downhill as time goes on, as we've noticed. Now, in Greek mythology and in Greek history, it's very, very rich in amazing things. And looking at their teachings and their sciences and their histories, I think that they've derived a whole lot of things from India. I remember when I was in high school, 12th grade, I believe it was. 12th grade, 11th grade, somewhere in there. We had a mythology class, of which I got an A in. And I think that I did so well in it because somehow or another these kinds of things just appealed to me. But I remember that, so I'm studying, I didn't know anything about Hare Krishna at that time. So I'm studying Greek mythology, we're studying Roman mythology, and I find it all very fascinating. And then when I come to the Hare Krishna movement, they've got the same stories, the same kinds of things, the same gods, but just different names going on. And it was a bit of an epiphany for me, because I realized at that time that actually most of these stories were probably true, because Srila Prabhupada insists that these ancient stories coming out of India are actually all true. And so I kind of reasoned, well, if that's the case, then there's a good chance that most of those stories, being that they seem similar and they're the same gods, they're probably true coming out of these later civilizations as well. And we can see some pretty amazing things going on. Not so long ago, there was a movie that came out that was really good. It was called Troy. And it focused on the Trojan War, wherein in those days, some great personalities born of demigods were still present on this earth. And that was about, 3,000 years ago. So Lord Krishna, Achilles, was one of the main characters in that story, and he was said to be born of a god. So that's why he was so powerful. He was powerful like Arjuna was powerful, undefeatable in battle, indefatigable. He always seemed to have plenty of energy in a battle, never seemed to get wore out. And we hear about the same kinds of things from our heroes from the ancient Vedic literatures. For you new folks that are coming here, this chapter in the Srimad Bhagavatam that we're reading is called Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. And this is about the story of the very first person born in this universe per the Vedic understanding. His name is Lord Brahmā. Now in Christianity we hear that it's Adam and Eve, but in the Vedic literatures we get a different story. And this is much older than than a lot of the Christian scriptures. The stories that are in here are not just simply from 5,000 years ago. They're actually much, much, much older. They were just written down for the very first time and put into a book form by the author of this book, Srila Vyasadeva, Vedavyas. Krishna Dvaipana Vyasadeva was formerly his name. And for the very first time, because of the progression of this age, it was understood that people's memory would become short. Prior to 5,000 years ago, great sages, great personalities who were very pure and empowered by the mode of goodness in their hearts and in their lives, and their austerities of penances and yogic performances, had amazing memories and so much information they could remember. But with the onset of this particular age, which is known as the Kali Yuga, and it started 5,000 years ago, qualities in men and women become dramatically reduced by the powerful influence of the modes of passion and ignorance in this age, which causes our memories to become not as good as they were before, and our intelligence and our lifespans shorter than they were before. In so many ancient literatures, we hear about the lifespans of people being substantially longer. And in some cases, we hear that lifespans of people were 10,000 years, and even going back further, it was like 100,000 years. The story in the Christian Bible of Methuselah was that he was 1,000 years old, so how is that possible? Previous ages, there were the principles and laws of material nature applied differently. But now here we are in the Kali Yuga, and the Bhagavatam specifically cites that our age span, our duration of life is about 100 years at best, and that will even be further reduced as this age progresses. So in any case, this story of Lord Brahmā, the very first person in the universe, how he was born and how he attained self-realization, because the first person in the universe, according to the Vedic literatures, is charged with the task of engineering and designing the material universe. Lord Krishna is in God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, exists in the spiritual world beyond the coverings of material nature. The material nature, the darkness of the material universe and the material nature has its limit. It ends at some point. We're not able to perceive that limit, but it does have a limit. The Vedic scriptures describe all this in great detail. And beyond that limit is the truly unlimited spiritual sky, which is fully illuminated by the effulgence emanating from the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, in that abode of mine, there is no need for a sun or a moon or electricity to illuminate it. So this exists beyond darkness. In the material world, suns have to be created. Suns, moons, and stars have to be created along with electricity in order to provide us illumination. Because this is the nature of the material energy is darkness, straight up. That's why wherever we are, all you got to do is cover a little spot, wherever it may be, and what's going to be there? Darkness. So Lord Brahmā, the first person created in the universe, is charged with the task of engineering the arrangement of planets, establishing suns, and different types of bodies of life forms that make up everything that we see. So he meditated when he was first born, and it's described that he was born from a flower that grew from the navel of the Lord. And when this flower opened, he was there. Then he meditated. He didn't know what to do. He saw that the world was dark in all directions. This is this chapter, just so you know. And then, so he meditated. He was instructed to meditate. And then after his meditation for a period of a long time, his perfect self-realization was that the Supreme Lord appeared before him, showed him the spiritual world, and then gave him the power to create the material world. Lord Brahmā, seeing the spiritual world, then created the material world as best he could using material elements to try to replicate the beauty of the spiritual world. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So this is what this particular chapter is all about. I wanted to move on to some other things that I had prepared. A few days ago, Jai Krishna Prabhu gave a class, and at the end of the class, it was mentioned that Indradumna Swami had been giving some lectures that are on YouTube, and that were about all kinds of different things. And some of his lectures, there's a 12-part series about Srila Rupa Goswami's deity of Govinda Dev, of which I knew very little about, and I've been in this movement for such a long time. And so Indradumna Maharaj is talking about the Vrindaban Institute of Higher Education and how they have so many old literatures, and many of these old manuscripts written on palm leaves by the original authors have not been printed yet. They've not been made into books yet. So he's saying that there is so much stuff that no one's seen yet, and he is so inspired by what he's been reading and what he's been seeing. He went there. He's looking at all these different manuscripts, and he's becoming so fascinated by what he's seeing that he's made these lecture series that you can see on YouTube, talking about some of these things, introducing us to some of this information for the very first time. So I was listening. So as soon as I heard that this was out there, I was like, yes, because I'm a pastimes guy. I like to listen to the pastimes of the Lord, and so I, not knowing much about Rupa Goswami's Govinda Dev deity, having visited Vrindavan, seen that amazing temple, hearing the basic story about how it was built and then how it was subsequently partly destroyed by a tyrannical Muslim ruler. So I wanted to know more. So as soon as I found out that this information was out there, I started listening to those lectures. And just yesterday morning, I finally made it to the 12th in the series, and in the 12th lecture, there's a very, very nice story about a pastime of Srila Rupa Goswami's Govinda Dev. I think everybody probably knows that Govinda Dev's temple was completed after Rupa Goswami left this world. Then when Aurangzeb, one of the sons of the ruler of Akbar, one of his sons was a very demoniac personality and very envious, and thinking that only Islam was the only religion worth having in the world, he decided to take up a campaign against Hinduism. And so he found out about the Govinda Dev's temple, Govindaji's temple, Srila Rupa Goswami's temple. He found out about it, and he heard about how nice it was, and he decided to take it down. So he sent his soldiers there, and for several months, 2 months, they spent dismantling the top 4 stories of a 7-story building, leaving only 3 in the end. And then on top of it, to add insult to injury, what he did was, and this is something I never knew, and there's actually a picture of it somewhere. He installed a small mosque on top of Govindaji's temple. After they tore down those numerous stories, flattened them, and he installed a little mosque on top of that temple. And there's a picture of it somewhere. And then there's also a picture of it later on, showing it around the same time period, not too long after, an old picture that shows it missing, because at one point a great personality, a powerful politician, had it removed. And so in this 12th lecture series, Indradumna Maharaj wants to talk about a pastime of Govinda, which is very, very popular in Jaipur, very well-known old pastime. So it goes like this. First off, Maharaj starts talking about, he wants to glorify a particular book and a particular personality. Glorification of the devotees is always highly, highly auspicious, and indeed it destroys offenses against devotees as well too. So he began with this information, and he wanted to focus on several servants of Govindaji. And Gaur Govinda Maharaj used to quote a verse that says like this: I have heard from the mouth of sadhus and guru that by glorifying Vaishnavas, one delivers oneself from the material world. So in the Vrindavan Institute, there are several prayers to Rupa Goswami, and one by a devotee named Govardhan Bhatta Goswami. He was in the line, a very, very preeminent person in the line of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And he lived during the time of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He wrote a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the introduction to his commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, he wrote this verse: My greatest good fortune is that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and I are friends forever. Very beautiful verse. He also wrote another book called Govardhan Bhatta Goswami Granthavali. These are books that Maharaj is finding that are out of print, but he's finding, and he went through them, and he just picks out a few things that he found very fascinating and very nice. So in that book, Govardhan Bhatta Goswami Granthavali, in the third part of that book, that's in 3 parts, there are 54 slokas in that third part of that book, only glorifying Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. So here are a couple of those verses. Who can achieve the shelter of the lotus feet of Sri Radha without the association of Rupa Goswami? By hearing his beautiful compositions and seeing his incomparable pearl-like handwriting, Lord Chaitanya happily dances while glorifying and praising him with all the devotees. And that's a direct reference to the Chaitanya Charitamrita when Rupa Goswami came to Puri for the first time and began reading his plays to Lord Chaitanya and the devotees who were present there. Ramananda Roy said that actually Lord Chaitanya looked at Rupa Goswami's manuscript and saw his handwriting, and Lord Chaitanya commented that the handwriting of Rupa Goswami is just like rows of pearls. It was very beautifully done. And then another verse goes like this. Today, Sri Rupa is residing in Sri Vrindaban, being more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. He's holding a clay pot in one hand and a woolen shawl on his shoulder. He sings the pastimes of Radhakanta while sometimes sitting in the shadow of a kalpavriksha tree, constantly chanting the names of Krishna, and every day he begs from the houses of brahmanas. Maharaj is pointing out that the loincloth that Rupa and Sanatan wear, and we see that in pictures as well too, that it had kind of a brownish tint to it. So when someone would give them some brand new cloth, which was obviously very white, they would tear it up and they would make the loincloths on it. But what they would do, and this is written somewhere in these manuscripts, what they did was they would take that new cloth, they would take it near the bank of the Yamuna, and they would bury it in the ground and leave it sit there like that for a week or so. And then they would take it out and then they would wash it in the Yamuna, and that would give it its light tan color. So that's how they did that. Also it's said that Rupa Goswami wore a black woolen chadar over his left shoulder in the winter time. So these are just some tidbits of Rupa Goswami and his glorification. Obviously there's lots and lots of more, but here I'm going to now launch into the story that I really, really liked and enjoyed, and I wanted to share it with everybody because it's so beautiful. After I stretch out my legs a little here. Okay. So, in Jaipur, after Govinda Dev was rescued from Aurangzeb and moved to Jaipur, and a temple was established for him. One of the great kings at that time was Jaya Singh. Jaya Singh II. When he died, he arranged for the worship of Govinda Dev to go on in a grand way. All the kings that came after King Jaya Singh followed what he had established. Jaya Singh's eldest son was Ishwar Singh. He continued the seva exactly as his father had established. His son was Madhava Singh I. It's written that he was especially devoted to Govinda Dev. And you know, as I was reading this and I was hearing how the father, the son, the next son, I remember long ago Srila Prabhupada had told us that even in our movement, the children of our children would be all very, very pure-hearted devotees. And it's as best I can see that's come to pass, because I'm always thrilled to see the young people who come here and do the 24-hour kirtan thing and engage in so much wonderful service, and knowing that they're the children of the devotees of the movement, and how to see their enthusiasm and to see how devoted they are and how nicely they've taken to it. You know, clearly they are great benefactors of their parents and inheritors of great pure devotion. So there's a document where the court describes Madhava Singh I daily activities. And Indradumna Swami had found this, and it is written about his morning activities that, by one of the court recorders, has stated, "Our king Madhava Singh sits in the palanquin which is carried by servants. Starting from Chandra Palace, it's carried to Govinda Dev's temple. Dancers welcome the king there at the gates of the temple, and the king gives golden coins to the dancers. Then the king, who was born in the Kurma lineage, walks inside the temple with utmost humility. There, he waits for the bhoga offering and watches the artik performance of the deity. Then he offers his obeisances and offers gifts and gold coins to the lotus feet of Sri Govinda Dev. At last he takes blessings for Govinda Dev for the well-being of his kingdom. Madhava Singh the first's son was Pratap Singh the first, and he ruled Jaipur as well. He was also a great devotee of Govindaji. It is said that every night Govindaji would appear to him in a dream. And because of that, he earned the nickname Brajanidhi, which means the treasure of Vrindaban. His devotional life, Pratap Singh's, was recorded in a book called Pratapa-Prakash. It's also said that he could compose Sanskrit verses to Govindaji that he had composed. He would go to Govindaji's temple, and the day before he would compose some Sanskrit verses and go to Govindaji's temple, and then he would recite those verses that he had composed before the Lord. And then he would return to his palace. His daily program was like this. From 5:30 a.m. till noon, he would go to his own temple in his palace, and there he would worship his personal black stone deity of Krishna, whom he also called Govinda Dev. During that period, he had a strict rule that even his own queen could not disturb him. Severe chastisement would be handed out if he was disturbed. Actually, he had taken a strict vow not to leave his quarters during this time for any reason, just to give pleasure to his deity. If any important matter came up, his chief minister, whose name was Jayachand, would attend to the matter no matter how urgent it was. The king was not to be disturbed. One day, as Jaya Singh was in his temple room worshipping Govinda Dev, at around 8 a.m. in the morning, Jaipur was suddenly attacked by an infamous Mughal ruler and his large ferocious army. Jaipur has a wall around the city whose soldiers were attacking it and trying to get in. It was a surprise attack. Within minutes, Jayachand came running to Pratap Singh's quarters to inform him, but he stopped short, thinking that Maharaj would be angry and that he might even have his head for disturbing him. So rather than entering, he stood by the door, ringing a bell in hopes of attracting Maharaj's attention. But nothing happened. This is a very famous pastime in Jaipur, well known to this day, just so you all know. During this time, Maharaj's troops started to rally in the main courtyard of the city. But without their king, they were hesitant to go into battle. The situation was critical. The citizens were very worried. Then suddenly, to the amazement of everyone, the king came out of his quarters, dressed in full battle gear, armed to the teeth with his swords and knives and all of his weapons. There's a tradition amongst the Rajput kings that before they went into battle, the king would perform a puja of his sword. Gathering his generals and ministers, this puja was done. It's described that as the enemy soldiers were coming over the walls, this puja was being performed. After this, his queen would come forward per the tradition, and she would cut her thumb on the king's very razor-sharp sword. And then with that bloody finger, she would anoint the king's forehead with a mark, kind of like tilak, and called out 3 times very loudly, Vijaya Bhava, Vijaya Bhava, Vijaya Bhava, or you will be victorious. Then, mounting his horse, Maharaj Pratap Singh charged out of the main gate with his army right behind him. But it was the king himself who practically single-handedly cut down the enemy one after another. Maharaj Pratap Singh was a large man, and it was said that his sword was more than 3 times the size of the average sword at that time. He was a big guy. It is said that in that battle, he cut over 300 men in half, starting at the tops of their heads, going downwards. It's written that his soldiers had never seen him so ferocious in battle. He was like a man possessed, and he didn't even seem to tire. It is said that just by his roaring, some of the enemy soldiers died. At one point in the fight, it said that one enemy soldier got close enough to pierce his leg with a lance. He poked him in the thigh with his lance, and blood flowed from that wound. But the king killed that soldier also. After 4 hours, all the enemy lay dead on the battlefield, including the opposing king. It's described that there was a lake of blood there. Then, as the king re-entered his city, he was received by all of his citizens with Jai Ho, as they would normally do. There was a great celebration, and everyone saw the bloodied bandage around his thigh. And he was covered in dust, his clothes were torn, and he was limping from the wound. He returned back to his private temple quarters precisely at noon. And this was the normal time that he finished his puja. Remember, it was from 5:30 a.m. till noon. He was in his room every single day doing his puja to his little black Govinda Dev deity. However, on this day, no sooner than he entered his quarters, that again the king walked out in fresh clothes, bright-faced, and with no wound on his leg. He was fine. So his generals all saw this, and they were in disbelief. His chief minister, Jai Chand, said, "Your Royal Highness, how is it that you stand before us in fresh cloth with a smiling face and no wound on your leg?" The king was confused and said, "What do you mean? Why should I appear this way? I've just come from my worship. I've not left my quarters." "No, Your Highness," said Jai Chand, "you left your quarters hours ago, worshipped your sword, rode into battle, and defeated your enemy, and you were wounded. We all saw it." So Pratap Singh was a great devotee. He was very intelligent. He was very Krishna conscious. And after a few moments, he looked at the sky and shouted, "O Govinda, O Govinda, O Govinda, it can only be you." Then he took all his ministers to Govindaji's temple. And they stood before the closed curtain, the altar, and the curtain was closed. They stood before it. And then, with one grand movement of his arm, he ordered the pujari to open the curtains. As the pujari did so, and everyone saw the Lord, they fainted and gasped. Govinda Dev was standing there in torn clothes and a blood-stained cloth wrapped around his leg. His clothes were dusty, with a smile on his face, playing his flute. It was the Lord who assumed the form of the king and went out to fight for him. After that, the people far and wide came to see the Lord after hearing of this event, and they also praised the king for his devotion. And this story is still recounted by the people of Jaipur to this day. Hare Krishna, there you have it. It's 8:45, and I finished right on time. So are there any questions or comments? Now, I don't know more to the story about this, so if you ask me more, I'll have to say I don't know. So it'd have to be about something else. Did you all like that story? I love that story. I thought that was just fantastic. All right, I guess then we'll end there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Have a good day, and all glories to your service. Srila Prabhupada ki.